Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Sally Pinto and I'm from the Yonkers More neighborhood naturally occurring retirement community. We launched back in January of 2020 and we're here to serve seniors 60 plus in Northeast Yonkers. We have lots of fun programs and activities, and we also have a lot of resources for you as well. Our programs include meditation chair yoga, body mind fitness, bingo, and any other programs that you might be interested, like arts and gardening. We have our resource specialist, Alexa Smith, who can help you with finding services and activities out there for you, as well as our nurse, Barbara Simone, who can help answer your health-related questions. We're here for you, we're here for our community, and we look forward to seeing you in our programs. Enjoy.
Hello, everybody. I'm Alexa Smith, the resource specialist with the Yonkers More. I'm here to help with application assistance, referrals for home delivered meals, and transportation services will be coming soon. We also offer Zoom activities and Zoom programs. And if you have any other questions or concerns, I'm here to help. Thank you so much and enjoy the program.
Welcome. I'm Barbara Simone, registered nurse. I recently retired from Westchester County's Health Department as a public health nurse. I am now here to try to assist you with any medical or preventive care issues. Enjoy this program, and I'm looking forward to working with you.
How do I do, when you think about trees, and if you ever see veins in your, you can actually see it through under your skin, veins. It's the idea of the trunk and how it, branches out, that's the pun intended. It actually branches out organically. There's no, we always say like the main shape of the tree, if you had to pick one, is like the letter Y. So I always do two main trunks, and if you want to call them arteries, or two main branches, two main arms, starting from the bottom. There's always one trunk on each tree. And I use a combination of colors. I start off with brown, because when we think about trunks and trees and wood, we think brown. So when you start this off, and this is a fairly balanced competition, you can have your tree off to the left or off to the right. That's up to you. For the purposes of this, following the demo, we're going to start in the middle. So I draw with oil pastel. I very rarely start with pencil when I do a drawing in watercolor or oil pastel. We're going to be free flowing, kind of organic with this. So there's no need to kind of really plot this out. It's going to be natural. So just draw kind of a natural sketchy line. Again, think about that Y shape, and then you kind of do two main arms. And this tree is kind of growing so much, it's growing off the page. It's going off the top, off the sides. If you want to make a smaller tree that's kind of bunched in the middle, you can do that too. I want this tree to bloom off the page. So that's what the idea for this is. Okay, so you have the two main branches. And then the trunk also is like different arms that kind of grow down. So I always draw a trunk, and the roots, not the trunk, I'm sorry, the roots. The roots of the tree grow into the ground, but they also kind of grow and spread across the top of the ground. So you kind of put some roots, and again, they're growing to try to get moisture. So there's always a reason why nature is the way it is. So I always show roots. Sometimes grass covers the roots, but I like to show the roots. So the main part of the tree is done. It's the main arteries, if you want to call it that, and the trunk and the roots. And then after this, everything kind of grows from there. And it grows arbitrarily, or some here, some there, not sticky. There are some sticky trees, like with straight sticks, but I'm basing this like on a cherry blossom tree. And if you ever see those, they're very kind of gnarly, and there are nothing straight about cherry blossom trees. So I'm kind of filling up my whole space with just the branches. And it kind of does, I don't know if you notice it, it looks like veins and arteries. And I always feel like there's nature, what grows outside kind of is related to what's, how our bodies are. And this is a great demonstration of that. So you're just going to make your branches kind of, this part's always fun. It's almost like Zen doodling. with trees also, I mean, if you look outside and look at trees, some branches sort of curve down and then grow. And that's what makes the tree, when you do it that way, it makes it look more natural, more realistic. How many branches you want to put on is up to you. I like drawing branches, so I might, put more than you want to put. And then after the branches, you have limbs of the tree, and then you have twigs. I might be splitting that up. So you have limbs, branches, and then twigs. So you can do your twigs with oil pastel or with watercolor, which we'll be going over in a minute. So the tree is growing. It literally is growing. At this point, if you want to fill in your trunk, you can. You can always go back and add more branches. Sometimes branches intersect other branches. You can do that. Okay, I'm going to go back and fill in. And when I fill in, I mimic how bark is. Bark is rough. So my strokes are kind of going to be rough. Mostly, vertical, because that's how the trunk is, except for birch trees. Birch trees, the trunk sort of wraps around the tree. I love birch. But oak trees and cherry trees in particular have very rough, gnarly bark. So that's the barky. Let me see if I put a little so to show the. All right, now that's the basic color, the base color of my tree. How did I get to that? I use a couple of colors. I never use black, or I should say I rarely use black. And if you've been in other classes of mine, you'll know that. So I use, to make the dark sides, the darker colors, I use a combination of blue and purple, and then mix it with the brown. And then I use white, and I get the highlights with that. So I'm going to choose this side to be the dark side, the shadow side. So I put the blue right on top of that. And if you want to do this with watercolor, it's the same basic process. It's the same stroke, except that you're going to use watercolor paint. I'm doing that with one side of the roots also. And then it's the same thing here. I'm kind of doing a rough, barky texture. And then, here and there on the branches, you do the same thing. You just mix it. Nothing in nature is just flat. It always has like all this dimensional, layering of color. And when you do that with whether it's paint or color pencil, or in this case, oil pastel, we're doing the same thing. We're kind of adding layers of color. And that makes it look more natural, more realistic, more visually interesting. All right, I'm almost done with these branches. I'm going to add some purple. And there's a reason, maybe the kids could answer the question about why I'm using oil pastel first and then putting watercolor on top. Does anybody know? Oil and water, what happens with oil pastel? Now I'm using the purple, which is a medium color between both of them. If I put watercolor on top of oil pastel, anybody know what will happen?
The oil holds the water differently. It doesn't. It's not going to bleed the pastel. The pastel is going to contain. It's not going to bleed out.
Yeah. So it doesn't blend with it, and it's almost like a resist. I don't know if anybody has ever like dripped wax onto something, and then if you're eating, you have candles at a candlelight dinner. If you drip water on top of that wax, it resists it and it doesn't go through. So the watercolor will not cover what I've done because they are, oil and water don't mix. They always say oil likes to be on top. So you can do the oil pastel first. And then when you dab it with watercolor, which is what I did here for the leaves, because you're not going to paint around these branches. That would take you hours and hours. You're going to just put the watercolor right on top. And if you have a nice solid oil pastel line there, the oil pastel will come right out. Will hold its own, let's put it that way. It won't be covered by the watercolor. Now, if you're using acrylic paint on top of that, acrylic paint, unless you water it down, if you're using thick acrylic paint, that'll cover it. But we're not, we're using watercolor, and it's a translucent watercolor, which means it's not opaque, it's translucent. It'll show through what's underneath. And I love the blending quality of oil pastel. So oil pastel and oil paint are my favorite material to use because they're so forgiving, and you could keep mixing layer on top of layer. You could do that with watercolor too, but if you do that too much with watercolor, it gets kind of muddy and dull. So it's also easier to do this part because your hand is closer to the paper than if you're using a brush. And also there's no going back and forth to the paint, to watercolor brush. You're doing it right with, it's like a stick. You're doing it with that. And as you drag this stick of oil color on against the wood here, it blends it. It blends your colors that you've put in. You can always go back and add more if you want. You can make it darker or lighter. It's up to you. I'm going to again say, this is looking like I might have added some black in there, I think, right? But I didn't. And that's what the beauty of not using the black. There is, except for like obsidian and a few other things. And they're all, black is one of the least natural colors, and blue, they always, there are some flowers that are blue, blueberries, but some people say those are purple, but they're called blueberries. So the blue actually helps with getting that natural color. But if you tend to use black, it makes it a little deeper than you want it to be. But some people like to use black, but I don't use black, it's mine. All right, so now I'm going to use my last thing, and I always go back to, I might want to add some more branches or twigs. Like I feel like I could probably add some here. On this one here, I would go back, maybe do that, go across, so you can add it. Nothing is ever finished if you don't want it to be. When I sign something, I'm done. But at this point, I can still keep working. And also, I added some branches on top afterwards. You could see after I put the watercolor, which you could do. But when I added, I'd do the same process. I started with my base color, which is the brown. And then I went with blue. And then the purple to sort of mix it all in, or the violet, whatever you want to call it. Okay, and then I use white, and white kind of, because if you look at, I'm looking outside of my maple tree. I don't have an oak tree on my property, a maple tree. The white, there are parts of it, even when it's kind of gray out like it is today, just turn that way. There are parts of the trunk that are lighter than other parts. So I'm just kind of adding those. Again, it's rough because bark is rough. So my strokes are rough, and I'll put this closer. I'll put the, my laptop closer so you can see close up. And this also sort of blends everything together. So dual purpose, it adds highlights and it blends. And you can do that sparingly here and there on the branches. Maybe it's a sunny day and there's more highlights. You can. Sometimes I feel like I sound like Bob Ross. In your world and where your tree is, maybe it's sunny, or maybe it's cloudy like it is today. I guess he's sort of ingrained from watching him when I was a kid. You are creating kind of your own world when you make these little, images with these little, especially when there's landscapes. And the oil pastel too, especially if it's fairly new, but you can break an oil pastel too, so you can get a sharp edge. And the sharp edge gives you a thinner point, you know. It's a flat edge, it's not even sharp, it's like a flat part of it. Let's do some here. See, the texture is pretty rough. If you get oil pastel crumbs, brush them off. Now I'm blocking the light. Can you see the texture? Ooh. That's the best I can do. Wait a minute. If I put it up too close, it blocks the light. Can you all see that, the texture of it? You should have a fairly rough texture because it's, you know, it's bark, and bark is rough. Okay, so that's basically done. Everything else is done with watercolor. I did the ground here with watercolor, the pink around the bark, that's the falling petals, you know, just, you know, looks like it's almost like bleeding pink or something, but you know, you can be specific and do dots there too. I just did it pretty quickly. So the next step now is the pink, and that's fun. And yours is going to be laying flat, and mine, I'll have some dripping in mine. You won't have dripping in yours. So what you're going to do, and you can have, what other colors are there? There's, I guess there's yellow flowering trees. Forsythia is yellow, it's a different shape. The Forsythia has, you know, straight branches, but this is, again, it's based on the cherry tree, the cherry blossoms. So I'm mixing some red here. And if you don't have white, that's fine. Very rarely do we use kind of white with watercolor. You just use a thin red because the paper is white and red makes pink. So let's, for the purposes of assuming people don't have pink, I just don't want too wet of a paint because it'll drip. All you do is, this is a medium brush, you kind of just dab it. Yeah, it's dripping. So I'm going to work quickly because if I catch it while it's dripping, I can spread it out. You dab it. And the nice thing is, I don't know if you can see the dark spots. When it lays flat, those dark spots pool and they look like, you know, blossoms.
Teresa, if we don't have watercolor, we can't use the
Okay.
pastel.
If you don't have watercolor, let me put that over there. You're going to do the leaves with, or the flowers with your oil pastel.
Okay.
Can I have, does anybody not have watercolor? Because I can do some of each. So if you're going to do oil pastel and you want to, if you have a pink, you're just going to
have acrylic.
Oh, okay. So acrylic, you're just going to thin it out. So acrylic is a form of watercolor. It is water-based. It's just not as chalky, I guess, or it's not like in cakes. So you have to just mix it with water. So that's fine. Acrylic is fine. So, you know, I could use acrylic. Let me grab my acrylic. The thing is that with acrylic, you do need to thin it out. I'll be right back. You need to thin it out with water so that it doesn't cover your oil pastel. So if I have like this kind of acrylic, I just would squeeze a little on my palette, which I've done here. There are some watercolors that are in tubes, and it's the same process, except that acrylic is a little more sturdy. It's kind of likes to be thick. So this is the acrylic paint here. There's a, you know, a dab of acrylic paint, and when you mix it with water, it acts as watercolor. So that's the same kind of process. And then you dab it. You can't even really tell the difference. You don't want it to be thick though. You do want to mix with watercolor. See how when I say it's sturdier, acrylic likes to take over. If you mix it with water, it will not cover your branches. So that's basically it. I'm like sort of pouncing. I'm not ruining my brush though. I don't want you like to pound it. It's just called pouncing. So you take the actual brush and you kind of let the brush do the work. The shape of the bristles sort of and this will work better for yours because you're not doing yours vertically. It will, those little darker spots will pool and it'll look like blossoms. And that's how I got these darker spots there. The color just pools, the pigment dries darker where it pools. So you're going to do that across the whole tree, and you can go right over the branches. If your acrylic paint is thin enough, it will not cover it. So you're not going to want to use acrylic paint right out of the tube and do that. That'll cover it, and you can test it and see it'll cover it right up. So we're looking for this translucency. I put it right there, and the oil pastel acts as a resist, and it lets you paint on top without. I actually want to add a branch over here, which I will do. Way it fills here. So I can add more. The more branches I have, the more flowers I can have. Unless you want to make a magical tree that has flowers that grow without branches, you can do that too. Is everybody doing fairly well with their acrylic in terms of mixing it with water? Is that working? Okay, so I'm going to add some more flowers over there. And this also, this pink color is my base color. And then I've added other colors on top, and that adds dimension. It adds interest, the layering of color. And my tree is growing, the blossoms are growing off the page, so I'm going off my page here. And as it's dripping, I'm trying to catch the drips and spread them. You don't have to worry about that. Gravity will help. Gravity is working against me here, but gravity will work with you on yours. I don't know if you could see this, but as I'm doing this, I want more flowers here. So I'm going to add branches on top of that when I'm done. So you usually have branches for flowers to grow from. And where I'm putting the flowers is basically around the branches. I mean, kind of a no-brainer, right? But here, I put some there. I'm going to put some flowers on the branches on top of there. I'm going to put some branches on top of there. So I'm letting my flowers decide how I want this tree to grow, even though I put the branches in already. That's where you're kind of allowed to ad lib, I guess is that the word, improvise.
I'm doing my programming here.
I just think it's effects.
Yeah.
I'm almost done with this pink, the pink layer. I could wait to see if everyone's at that same point about. I work a little faster than, when I'm doing a demo. So I can wait. At this point also I can go back over, and as it dries, you can see that it gets pink and lighter. And I have, I kind of like the way this looks actually, the way it's like bottom heavy dark. It almost looks like there's like a feeling of fall leaves. I don't know, there's something that's falling in the, so I mean, if you wanted to do it vertically, you would tape it up on something. You get more of this kind of effect when you do it horizontally. And as it dries, you can see areas that are darker, areas that you might want to put more pink on. But now I'm going to actually shift colors a little bit. And this is something I actually learned from my dad. Because I'm going to have grass, that's the last thing I do. Because when a tree is flowering, the leaves are not big. I added tiny little leaves here and there, but in the actual pink, there's little touches of green. And that's both to show that there are leaves, and also the green and the pink are opposite colors. And whenever you do anything natural, or even like say you're doing a portrait, you always balance out, like if a portrait face is kind of like a warm brown tones, then you would put some teals, like say in a face for the shadows, or in this case we would put light green to balance it out, and it gives it some interest, and it gives it again that dimension. I also added purple to add some of the shadows, so it's never just a straight color, not if we're trying to go for a natural look. Right now what I'm doing is just deepening some of the pink, and then you always go light to dark too. That's the other thing with paint. You kind of can cover light. It's harder to cover dark. So you add dark you add darks at the end. So now I'm going to switch to more of a purple color. And the last color I'm going to add in there is the greens. And there are touches of green in the top one. And that's what you might not notice it right off the bat, but they are there. And you don't want to notice it right off the bat. It's supposed to be natural. And a flowering tree predominantly is full of flowers, not really the leaves. So now you can use the acrylic the same way. I'm going to just stick with my watercolor since I have it, and I'm mixing a little bit of violet purplish color into my pink here. So it's turning into a purple color. If you have blue, you can use a tiny, tiny touch of blue and mix it with your red and pink, and that turns into a purple color. Because if you know the color theory, purple is made with blue and red, and blue and red are two primary colors. So now I just put touches of purple because there are shadows within here, and that's how I'm showing the shadows. It's the purple. And my stroke for how I'm touching the purple on there is not as, I don't put as much pressure because I want a smaller little section of purple. My main color, I put the pressure on to make the larger like splotches, which resemble the floral patterns. And the purple, because it's going to be the secondary, the shadow, the low lights color, I do that in smaller little splotches, like my technical term, splotches. And again, if your tree is more enclosed and not growing off the page, you'll have an enclosed kind of contained shape. When I did this, I was just in the mood for, you know, a growing tree, and I kind of am in that mood again. My tree is not actually going even past the edges. I guess it's maybe to do with the weather outside. It just got really, I need to have the pink to see the pretty pink. And Abby, and I know Stephanie's the other little kid, the little child here. If you wanted to put like a bird in the tree or a squirrel, that would be a fun thing to do too. I didn't even consider that, but you could put a little squirrel in the tree. I have a student. She comes to art workshops regularly, and whenever she comes, she always works in an owl somewhere in her painting, in her piece, whether it's a cityscape or. We've done a couple of treescapes, and she always puts an owl in. It's her signature thing. An owl would be nice here too. Although an owl would be out at nighttime, wouldn't it? It would be sleeping during the day. This is a daytime scene for sure. All right, so this tree is really blossoming. And the last touch for the tree part are those little green touches to show hints of leaves here and there. And also it's that whole idea of balancing color so that it's more like nature, because we're going to reflect the green around it, the grass, the green in the grass, and there are touches of pink, not only here, but in the grass, because that's also reflecting, or it's balancing out the pink, you know, reflecting the pink, not technically, but it's, you know, it's allowing for the pink in there. It's giving a nod to the pink in the trees. I'm sort of just going back over now and making sure I have the main, wherever the main branches and you know, twigs and stuff are, that flowers are coming from them. I want all my branches to be alive and blooming. So that's basically what I'm doing with that. Okay. Okay, so now we use, if you have green acrylic, you can use green. And I'm just wetting my green watercolor cake and mixing it on the side here because I'm also going to use that for the grass. Mix that on the side. And I'm actually, if you have a thinner brush, you can go ahead and switch to a thinner brush, or you can use, with a very light touch, you can use your whatever brush you have. And here and there, just do like little, I guess, leaf shape. You can go into the green first and put some green space shapes in there, dots in there to show the green like leaves, because the blossoms, some of them do have little leaves, but you can switch to a thinner brush if you have it. I'm just putting dots of green here and there to balance out that pink. This is not one of those things where it'll be like, oh my God, that transformed it. No, it's a subtle little thing that you're doing just to, you know, reflect what happens in nature. Some of these I'm going to stick out a little bit. Stray leaf. My daughter's kindergarten teacher used to say, a little dab will do ya, when she talked about glue. And Same applies with this. Little dabs will do you here. You don't need to press too hard. Just a nice little touch, light touch, like the brush is floating on the page, and that'll give you the effect that you're looking for. You're not going to like me, not a lot of pressure at all. Just little light touches, feathery little touches of green. Okay. Oops. All right, now the ground, you might want to have a hilly kind of background, or you might want to have some grass going behind, and then this is the main, but we're just going to keep it simple. And what you do again in your world, that's up to you. I'm just going to start with my base of green and go back to my bigger brush. So I can put more paint on there, and I'm just doing this, this root is sort of where the horizon line. So I'm just going to do that and maybe put this behind it a little bit. And you can see how it resists. It won't let you cover that. That's the nature of oil pastel. So I'm just going to put that, drag it across. The same thing on that side. And this part, before I get to the rest of the green, I'm going to go back to my pink color. And to indicate the petals that have fallen, because that happens a lot, it like snows, but with pink. Just put, it doesn't take a lot. An organic kind of horizontal brushy stroke, and you can cover right over the oil pastel because it won't cover it. Just put a little indication of like a pink puddle to show where the flowers petals have fallen. And then while it's still wet, then you go back, don't let that dry. You're gonna go back to your green and kind of finish filling in the green around it. Overlap it because the grass will also show through, especially around the edges where the petals start to be thinner. And I'm actually mixing a little bit of pink in here too. And again, that's to cause that balance. I'm going a little darker than my sample too, because I want to make sure you could see it. Okay. See how it's curling. Push it down. I'm going now, getting my pink again. I'm putting it here and there to just balance out that green, and maybe to show an indication of where some other petals might have fallen. Okay. Want to make my line more, my shape here more organic, so it looks like the petals are falling randomly rather than in a identifiable shape or any kind of straight edges. No, I don't want straight edges. I want this kind of amorphous shape. Now I'm going to let this grass area dry because there are little blades of grass that grow out of it. In order to do that, I need to have my background, the background where those grasses, those blades of grass are growing from, to be dry. So I'm going to also put in my branches where I added some, flower petals where there are branches, and see if there's anybody that has any questions at this point. How's everyone doing? Does anybody want to ask questions Doing good stuff. You like the thumbs up. You could tell when those students who are in Zoom class or, remote learning, the thumbs up. If you can see my screen, give me a thumbs up. Do you hear that a lot, Stephanie? So I'm just showing you here. I want to add branches here. You can also do that with watercolor. I can show you that with watercolor too. You can add your branches with watercolor. If you want to add some extra, you can thin out, make some really thin, or your acrylic paint, even better. You can make some really thin little twigs with acrylic paint if you have a skinny enough brush and if your paint is dry. So I can actually go back over and put some really thin. If your hand is nervous, even better, because twigs are you want kind of a nervous hand to do branches and stuff, because that's how they actually grow. They're not straight. You don't want a straight edge, so you can kind of make your hand tremble a little bit when you're doing branches. Because yeah, it's not letting me paint on top of the watercolor, the oil pastel, but I can add some shadows and highlights. But it will let you paint on top of watercolor or acrylic. You could paint on top of acrylic. If I had oil paint, I could paint on top of that oil, but oil does not like to be painted on top of with watercolor. It likes to be on top. So you can add some really thin branches here and there that are growing on top or through the flowers while you're waiting for your grass to dry. You can go back and add additional colors, flowers. What's nice about a thin brush is that you can do real detailed work. But if you have a medium-sized brush, you can get thin strokes by just letting the brush float on top of the page. And I put flowers here, so I'm putting some thin twigs. And I will move the video closer so you can see that too. I'm a big fan of mixing mediums when I can. So I like, say, using watercolor and oil pastel like we did here. Sometimes I use oil pastel with colored pencil. Colored pencil actually mushes the oil pastel around, and it gives fine detail that you can't get with oil pastel by itself. So that's a nice way to combine mediums. I use acrylic and then oil paint, but you have to use acrylic first because oil needs to be on top, as I said. But it's a good way to get different kind of layered effects. Now this tree is even more robust than my sample. I'm making it grow all the way out of the page. Yeah, okay, so I'm just looking at my grass, and that's dry enough to add grass. It's the blades of grass. So at this point, and I have blades of grass coming up, growing through the flower petals, because that's what would happen, in real life, in nature. So I'm going to put, when I do the grass, my brush is not going to. Is there a question? Oh, sorry. Okay, so when I do the blades of grass, my brush is going to be thin. I'm going to do nice and light. And you just start at the bottom and pull it up. Pull the brush up. You can have long blades of grass, thinner ones, skinnier ones. You just start off with you push up, or you just let it go up lightly, here and there. So when grass grows, it grows in bunches, and sometimes it's really, especially if it's a mowed lawn. Some grass is different than other grass, and it just likes to grow taller. So I'm like making little tufts of grass growing in front, like my roots. Some are growing behind. Some are growing up past through the flower petals. And you don't want to do this in any kind of organized pattern. Have some thick tufts here and maybe big empty areas, and then have some that go off the page. That makes it look three-dimensional. Makes it look more realistic. You know, you don't want to do any kind of pattern. I love painting grass. It's just like, again, it's like kind of like Zen. Let the brush kind of do the work. You're just moving your it's like holding a chopstick, I guess. You're just moving the 2 fingers here up and down. It's really all, or 3 fingers, because I'm holding the brush with 3 fingers. You can have lots of grass or just a little grass. It's up to you. This effect is a great little trick just to make things look realistic. Just doing grass. I used to paint murals, and when I painted murals, I would have vast expanses of green, and then just do this with the grass. I had a much bigger brush, of course, but it just gives a feeling of 3D, three-dimensionality, you know, realism. Now, if you wanted to, you can go and put little dots of color. I didn't do that in the sample, but you can do that here too. Like how you did your trees with the flowers there. You can do the same thing here. So it has a feeling of petals falling. And where my brush was vertical with the grass, my brush is horizontal. Your brush always mimics, I always tell my, be the cloud if you're painting a cloud. So with a cloud, you have big fluffy strokes. Be the grass if you're painting the grass, long upgrowing strokes. Here we're doing petals. So petals fall on the ground horizontally. So your strokes are horizontal. So that's if you have time to do that, it gives it more of a realistic look. And it doesn't take a lot. I'm just repeating this same horizontal, and being the petals falling on the floor, on the ground. Let it peter out as the petals will peter out. You know, the concentrated petal color will be around the tree, and then there'll be a few loose ones here and there.
Teresa, may I ask a question?
Yes, please. I love questions.
So when I only have 1 strip of watercolor, and when I use the green, it almost looks blue-green to me.
Do you have yellow? You may mix that with yellow. You can even put yellow on top. When I have a green that's too green, like maybe this one, I mix it with a little touch of brown or even red, because brown is just red and green. Or you can make brown with purple and blue. It's the secondary colors to get brown. So that tones it down. And I never use a bright, I mean, I also mix some of the pink that I used for the flowers. I put that on top and I washed it. Using colors that just takes a lot of practice. Figuring out what colors will do for you, what you can do to mix colors. And I never use a color, even with this that I squeeze out of the tube. That's just my thing. I never use it straight out of the tube. I always mix it with something. It's like I always want to, I never like to use a color that's exactly in the tube. I always kind of tone it down a little bit. Or I'll maybe add a yellow to a pink to just give it a little bit more of an interesting color. That's just me. But yes, if you're using that green, and you need to make it more of a grass green, yellow, a touch of brown, you know.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you.
That's a good question. I used this, I happened to have 2 strips, so I had a lighter green, but I still mixed it with a little bit of brown. It's just, you know, because if you look outside, even in the full sunlight, that would be yellow mixed in with there. So this is pretty much done. I mean, I can keep working on it, but I'm not going to, because there's a point where you say, okay, this is done. I need to sign it and finish it, because you could overwork a painting too.
Hi, everyone. This is Z from Yonkers Public Library. Thanks so much to Sally Pinto and Alexis and Barbara from Newark. Thank you to our community partners, WJCS, the City of Yonkers Office for the Aging, Westchester County Legislator Ruth Walter, Friends of Crestwood Library, and Yonkers Public Library for making this phenomenal partnership. And we thank each and every one of you for being part of our wellness community. Be well, stay well.